The door was drenched in bright red paint, like a scene from a bad movie. The building's owner stood back, watching his own tenant wreak havoc, completely unaware of who he was messing with. That moment marked the start of events that would upend everyone's lives in the building. But let's start from the beginning. The evening heat seemed to cling to everything. The chipped banisters, the faded floor tiles, even the air itself, which hung heavy like a storm about to break. Chuck's footsteps thudded up the stairs, each one echoing louder than the last, like a countdown. The paint can he carried swung in rhythm, its vivid red sloshing against the sides, a literal warning sign of the chaos about to unfold. By the time he reached apartment 4B, sweat dripped down his temple, mingling with the impatience on his face. The MAGA hat in the glass pane felt like a taunt, its bright red practically glowing in the dim light. Chuck muttered to himself, his voice low and venomous, the kind of rant you rehearse when you think no one's listening. First it's the hats, then it's the flags. Next thing you know, they're buying out the whole block. Inside, David, oblivious to the storm brewing outside his door, was meticulously plating his dinner. The smell of seared salmon filled the air, blending awkwardly with the scent of fresh paint wafting from the hallway. The first splatter of red against his doorframe made him pause. The second splatter sent him bolting for the door. When David swung it open, Chuck didn't even flinch. He stood there mid-swipe, as though he had every right to deface someone else's property. The dripping red paint was stark against the beige wood, creating a grotesque sort of artwork. "What the hell is wrong with you?" David's voice was sharp enough to cut through Chuck's self-righteous haze. Chuck turned, eyes narrowing. "What's wrong with me? What's wrong with you coming in here like you own the place?" The irony hung in the air like the smell of paint. David stepped forward, forcing Chuck to take a half-step back. "I don't need to explain myself to you," he said, his voice icy. "Clean it up." Chuck scoffed, but his bravado faltered. Without another word, David shut the door, leaving Chuck to stew in his own mess. The hallway seemed quieter after that, but the tension lingered like a bad stain. Morning arrived with a vengeance, bringing the relentless summer sun that turned the building's worn-out facade into a glaring reminder of its neglect. Tenants loitered in the lobby, their conversations humming like static, the air thick with speculation. They'd all seen the red streaks on David's door. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew who was behind it. Chuck, however, seemed unbothered. He leaned against the front desk, holding court with a small group of tenants who shared his disdain for the new crowd. He cracked a joke about snowflakes and their hats, earning a chuckle from a few reluctant listeners. The doors swung open, and David walked in, cutting through the chatter like a blade. Gone were the casual slacks and button-up shirt from the night before. Today, he wore a suit so sharp it could have sliced through Chuck's false confidence. Flanking him were two lawyers, their matching black briefcases an unspoken warning. "Good morning, Mr. Monroe," David said, his tone polite but devoid of warmth. The tenants fell silent, all eyes darting between the two men. Chuck straightened, his smirk faltering. "What do you want now?" he snapped, though his voice lacked its usual edge. David motioned to one of the lawyers who handed Chuck an envelope. He tore it open, his eyes scanning the official letterhead. His face paled as the realization dawned. "What the hell is this?" David stepped closer, his voice steady. "That, Mr. Monroe, is confirmation of my ownership. As of last week, I acquired this property. You've been working for me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Tenants exchanged wide-eyed glances, their shock mirrored in Chuck's slackened jaw. He sputtered, searching for words, but David didn't give him the chance. "I'll be conducting a thorough review of this building's management practices," David continued, his gaze locked on Chuck. "Let's start with the mess you made last night. Chuck's bravado crumbled completely. I was just— David raised a hand, silencing him. We'll discuss this in private. He turned on his heel, the lawyers following in step. Chuck shuffled after them, his usual swagger replaced by the shuffle of a man walking toward his reckoning. The office on the top floor was unrecognizable. What had once been a cluttered den of cigarette ash and mismatched furniture was now a sleek, modern space that radiated authority. The sunlight streaming through the spotless windows illuminated every corner, leaving no room for shadows or excuses. Chuck sat across from David, his paint-streaked hands clasped tightly in his lap. His usual bluster was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that made him shift in his seat like a kid caught in the principal's office. David leaned back in his chair, studying Chuck with a mix of disappointment and resolve. "You know," he began, his tone calm but cutting, "I don't care about the hat. I don't care about your opinions. What I do care about is the way you treat people." Chuck opened his mouth to protest, but David held up a hand. "Let me finish. Last night, you didn't just deface a door. You sent a message to every tenant in this building that you think you're above them. That stops today." Chuck's shoulders sagged, the weight of his actions finally sinking in. "I made a mistake," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. David leaned forward, his gaze unrelenting. "Yes, you did. And here's how we're going to fix it. Effective immediately, you're suspended from your managerial duties. You'll undergo training to address your behavior, and only then will I consider keeping you on board." Chuck nodded slowly, his usual arrogance replaced with something resembling humility. "Thank you," he muttered, though the words sounded hollow. David stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "You can go now," he said, his voice dismissive. As Chuck left the office, the tenants below whispered about the day's events, their voices a mix of disbelief and satisfaction. David watched from the window, his reflection superimposed against the city skyline. He didn't feel victorious, but he felt something better. Hope. What would you do in David's place? Would you handle it as calmly, or would you have taken a different approach? Share your thoughts and stories in the comments. Have you or someone you know faced a similar situation? Let's talk about how respect and accountability should shape our communities. Don't forget to like, share, and engage. Your opinion matters, and your voice helps spotlight important issues like this one. Together, we can create awareness and work toward a world where fairness and understanding prevail.